from Cisco?
Um,
Never shy for an opinion.
Well, I mean, all the cool kids have already transformed into IP, so everybody should be doing it, clearly. But kidding aside, what's interesting and what we've learned over the last couple of years is that a lot of the requirements of 2110 and others, which were considered to be complete myths that couldn't be done in software, couldn't be done with IPKit, we've busted all those myths. And where we've moved, and if you've been following us on this journey over the last couple of years, we were working to fulfill with IP Fabric for Media large central video router replacement by using COTS switching equipment, and then immediately step to virtualization technology and being able to orchestrate across bare metal hypervisor and containers, and we showed that last year. We also showed that you can orchestrate across multiple clouds, and Dan, I think it's another way of describing what you said by using a hybrid cloud model or a multi-cloud model. And now what we're able to show is just a much, much larger ecosystem, and working very closely with our partners, really fine-tuning this such that it's production quality.
Now, Dan, I'm always fascinated by the preparation process and even the history of the preparation process of what goes into Olympic Games, be them winter or summer. I mean, you go back to even the late 80s and the early 90s, members of the NBC or CBS Olympic teams, whoever had the rights at the time, might have to go out and basically set up residency in that city for multiple years just to get it ready. Now you guys are able to prefab and plan out a lot of things in Stanford, but still, in the way that technology evolves at a rapid pace here, you're still basically putting things on a boat and saying goodbye to it and seeing it in 3 months, and hopefully it's still cutting edge at that point. So what is how do you prepare for an Olympics when you do have to kind of, send the equipment off to war and then see it across the ocean 3 months later?
Yeah, so in our Stanford facility, which is our main broadcast facility, we have a space in our basement which is essentially the size of a football field. And we'll lay out on the floor, we'll tape out the room space we'll have there in country. And we'll lay out the equipment, we'll connect it, we'll interconnect it with our Stanford operations and inject latency so that we can actually emulate what Korea or what Rio would look like sitting just one floor down. And we're able to test out a lot of the workflows, we're able to refresh a lot of the equipment, we're actually able to test and vet some of the newer technologies that we do want to deploy. It's kind of tough between Rio and Korea. The summer and the winter games are timetable between games is pretty short. And so if you think about it, when we pack up all of our gear for the Rio games, it took a few months to get it over by boat back to the facilities. We unpack it, we redeploy it, we patch it, we uplift it, we refresh it, and then it's back on a boat again. And so the timetables between the summer and winter games is pretty short, and so it's really tough to really inject a lot of newer technologies. We have a lot more space or a lot more time between summer and winter, and so we anticipate a lot more innovation between now and the Tokyo Games that are coming up. But it really gave us a great opportunity to really test and vet out how workflows should, how they'd operate, and get the equipment ready.
All right. Real quickly, just to follow up with you, and then, gentlemen, feel free to hop in off of what he assesses. These are big, learning opportunities, these games. You might try some things, you might break some things along the way, and then some things might surprise you even as well. So these Pyeongchang games, as you have had the chance to kind of download them in your head as you've come back to the States, what were some of the key lessons that you took away from it?
For the Korean games, we really pushed the envelope a bit on trying more and more remote production. And it wasn't necessarily remote production from Korea back to the United States. It was remote production from the venues back to the International Broadcast Center. And so we reduced our footprint at a lot of the venues, bringing the video back to the IBC, manipulating and creating the content there, and then shipping it home. And in our facilities, prior to the games, testing and vetting it all out, there's a lot of technologies that's kind of new to the IP space. And so when you test it in its singular fashion, it works great. But when you actually, during games time, light it up and run it concurrently with multiple venues or multiple vendors' technologies, you tend to find and see a lot of stuff that you didn't see when you were first vetting it out. And so there were some aha moments there where we understood that the concurrency, real critically looking at and evaluating QoS, time syncing, PTP, all of that, and really the interaction between our gear that we had and we had tested and vetted out, but then also receiving rental gear and third-party gear and interacting with the host broadcaster and all of those components, stitching it all together and getting it up and running within a very short time period for the games was a real aha moment. And moving more to the IP side of the house and the workflows and leveraging network technology, there are a lot of dependencies there that the broadcast gear or the systems traditionally haven't had to deal with or haven't really vetted themselves out. And so you're really dealing with a lot of new but old challenges and hurdles to overcome.
So, what did your broadcast engineers? What did you give them? Any new tools? How did they face these? How did they face this challenge? Have you had to re-educate them, educate them, get them new skills than they had in the past?
I think it's a combination of both. I think there's a lot of opportunities to educate both sides of the house, the IT and the engineering side of the house, on how networks work, how to view and troubleshoot them, how to integrate or interoperate a lot of technologies that are more dependent now on IP-based technologies. And so there's a lot of opportunities there. I think there were a lot of things that we actually used just from a collaboration standpoint, making sure that people could communicate with each other. And so, a couple examples we were talking earlier about how we had integrate or we had leverage a lot of the telepresence technologies in kind of a unique fashion. We use it in the traditional sense with conference rooms and things like that, but we actually integrated it a bit more into our product or a production environment. Like, for instance, the athlete houses, which where the athletes stay. It's really difficult to get in there and actually install and implement infrastructure. You only have a very small window, about a half a day, a few weeks prior to the games, and then you are locked out, and nobody's getting in there to fix, to troubleshoot, to connect, to light up, any of that kind of stuff. And so we had instances where we would deploy some of the smaller Cisco telepresence units in those space and connect them back over a tunnel connection back to the IBC, and then bring that into a Cisco encoder right into our video routing environment. And so if we had to, say, break glass, we had an instance where the athletes' villages were locked down, we could bring in a talking head right into our video router using the Cisco telepresence technologies. And so there were a number of instances like that where we used a lot of that technology. Another example, great example, was water cooler. So we had set up some of the larger telepresence in hallways where you would typically see a lot of traffic from those that were in the IBC with those that were at home. And just walking by and seeing somebody and saying, hey, I need to talk to you about this. There were a number of times where you'd sit there and you'd see people standing there in the hallway having a conversation, the water cool conversation, with somebody 6,000 miles away. And just little things like that really made a difference in trying to sort of push the envelope on deploying new technologies, just the collaboration side of it.
So a question on the remote production, do you think that in the future it could help overcome some of the problems that you described where you have to get all this stuff kitted up and put it on a container and ship it? Now, obviously, the more kit you leave at home, you have more time to work on, more time to take new technologies. Do you see that as something that would benefit you in the future?
Oh, absolutely. I think that's actually the steps that we're taking is as you test out more and more technologies that can be left at home, your dependence and reliability, but also the stability of it is going to be key. There's still going to be a lot of those instances where the more confident you get in the technologies, the more you can leave at home. But there's still that case where an event like the Olympics, you're still going to need that break glass solution where at a bare minimum, if you lose your network connectivity or you lose some of your cloud services or something happens, you still need that break glass capability. And that's what you've traditionally had in the broadcast side of the house, what they've built in. And now we have to look for those options or those abilities to do that also on the IP side.
Yeah. Do you see a demand for more personalization of the content, for more multilateral content for different kinds of audiences? And how do you cope with that?
Do you guys have kids? Any of you have kids? I have 4 kids, and they consume content so differently than I ever did. And I see how they video snack, how they communicate with their friends, how they consume content, and I think those different avenues of how we get content out is how we drive that story and how we get that younger generation engaged in the story behind the athletes enough that they're willing to say, hey, something, there's this athlete that's coming up. Maybe I'll sit down on the couch and watch it with mom and pa, or maybe I'll create and pass along my own memes, right, to really generate more buzz around what's happening there during the games. So, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Sydney, you were talking about this in the back, and how this also even applies in like a news environment. How there's obviously so much pressure in a digital environment to seem like you just or have to always be on at all times, whether that's being live and broadcasting, or just having something constantly going up on social, be it Twitter, Facebook, or Snapchat, or whatever it may be. But also just kind of being able to monitoring all the time. We were talking about this in the back when I met with your colleague Lindsay Signora out in Pyeongchang, who runs the social media side for you guys. Of all of the events, the massive live streaming events that were being highlights, everything on top of it. At that point, it was like 7 or 8 days into the games, and the most shared and engaged with piece of content was a video of a walkie-talkie sliding down the ski hill, and some poor crew guy from the IOC chasing it down the hill, sliding, falling. That amplified the conversation, if you will. I think a lot of it ties back to this. It's like, okay, yes, maybe that's not, a 3-hour, live streaming, kind of event, but that's stuff that'll get people talking about and excited about, generating that water cooler conversation that you're kind of alluding to, that maybe we don't have as much as we used to in the sports media environment. How are you guys kind of prepared for not even just the stuff that we traditionally say is like point A to, point in, point out, everything else around it? There's a need to be paying attention to all of that as well.
Yeah, it's a great question. It's interesting to see in the broadcast space customers with different applications. And you start seeing these things move from one world to another. So this has been a problem for our news customers for a long time, where it's not all about putting on the 5 o'clock and 11 o'clock news anymore. You have to drive your mobile app, you have to drive social media and all this, and they're not getting tons of extra staff to do this, right? So we have to be smart about that. And so our asset management tools like Stratus have provided social media management, and it's cool because it links it back so that you can actually monitor the telemetry and the data from it, and use that to drive your linear broadcast as well. So you can say, hey, this was really popular, let's put it in the highlight. So we're seeing that now be more and more relevant in live production as well.
How about you, Benoit?
Yeah. On top of that, I think that we need in this industry to produce more with less. That's a reality. And so we want to use more and more artificial intelligence to go in this direction. And in fact, in order to help really the producers to focus on what's exceptional as the walkie-talkie driving, and then automate all what can be automated besides, so that they can focus on storytelling. Because at the end, we are all telling stories.
Yeah, but that's the challenging thing, though. Is like, let's be honest, that's not a moment that AI is going to be able to capture. Certainly not right now. Like, player tracking maybe can tell when a person's going into a shooting motion, but I don't think AI, I hope, has a sense of humor yet where it can go, that's ridiculous. I'm going to cut that.
There's the walkie-talkie. Right?
Exactly. So that means that if AI can proceed with the rest, then we can leave the producer focus on these kind of humoristic events.
Yeah, I think the other thing I'd add to it is that this is a good example of potentially citizen journalism as well, right? So people are, things happen, it's spontaneous, it's interesting, right? And people need to bring all that content in, not just the stuff from traditional high-end broadcast equipment.
How about the traditional streaming, though? I mean, you guys found a lot of success. It feels like anytime one of these tentpole events come up, we set new streaming records that will likely be broken in a couple of months at the World Cup. But hey, you keep on setting the bar over and over again, and you guys will be heavily involved with the World Cup too, being with your sister organization Telemundo, who will probably kill it with no U.S. men's national team in the World Cup this year. But that's another conversation. So, your assessment. I know you're not directly involved with that, but how are you setting up infrastructures so that kind of multi-event kind of thing can succeed? Because it really is unlike any other sporting event when you've got 6, 7, maybe 8 events all going on at the same time that people might want to watch.
Yeah, I think for us, the Olympics, it's a huge event, and the summer events or the winter events are one thing. The summer events are even twice as big, with the number of venues, the number of games. There are 5 new sports coming up, surfing and karate and skateboarding and
baseball and softball in there too. Those are bears, because those are going to be games that it's going to be like curling for you guys in the winter. It's just always going to be going on.
And they're spread out throughout. Yeah.
I've heard the stat that there's actually more hours of curling streamed than there are hours in the day. Like, you made like 35 hours of curling available a day.
That sounds kind of low, but you're right.
I made it up. I made that number up.
No, I think for the summer games. See now, let's see. So for the summer games, there's so many events going on that we don't have enough space on our linear channels to actually push all of that content. So just like the winter games, everything will be streamed. Every event will be streamed online. And when you talk about scaling up to that kind of scope, to be able to see every single game live for the Olympic event during the Olympics online is quite a feat. And that's where the IP and that's where cloud and that's where all the digital space really comes into play and really makes it easy to scale and to stream and to push all that content, just like we did in the winter games. So the value there and the opportunities certainly are. That's the only way I think we could deliver it, frankly.
Right. Dave, when we were talking in the back, you said you were a pretty big fan of the work that the NBC Olympics did on the streaming side. So what were some of the highlights or maybe some things you might have even recommend that may be done differently next time around?
So a couple things. So I thought that the integration of the analytics information, the integration of the sports and stats information was a very good step forward, in particular because it was fusing different types of data together. Now that might sound a little theoretical, but as you know, they're often completely different streams with completely different production teams working on it, but you're able to fuse the video data source with the statistics at the same time and keep it in sync, or close enough in sync for human noticing it. But what's interesting is that we haven't reinvented the Olympic watch party as a social phenomenon between individuals. And so a few things that we can try and do as an industry to step forward is incorporate more and more different modalities, if you want to think of it that way, of engaging socially with viewing sports, because today it's left to social media and the way you can express yourself that way. Now, also, what becomes really interesting is what you've done on the app side and how you're distributing this information out. And I was just wondering what the statistics look like, of the different ways that someone can consume that content coming out of the Olympics, and then what you're predicting forward for either the next Olympics or through the World Cup.
I don't have the exact numbers, but I know that for the Rio Games, they really caught us by surprise, the amount of digital content consumed. And it was a pleasant surprise, obviously, to see how much it was consumed. But for the Winter Games, I think it broke all those records as well. And I think it's certainly a huge opportunity for us to engage that generation of consumers who aren't accustomed to sitting and just watching linear content. And the whole social aspect of that and tying it all together and engaging the folks. We got a lot of feedback on that application and how it sort of brought all the data and the feeds and the extra cameras into place so that it actually drove more understanding of the actual game or the event that was going on. And that's going to be even more important for the Tokyo Games because a number of the games and the events there are going to be either not quite as understood or not quite as adopted. But if you can help create the story, if you can help create the understanding of what it is you're watching, a lot of those events are so fast. The start, the stop, it's boom, it's done. And to be able to build the story behind that so that people are engaged, whether it's socially, whether it's digitally, whether it's online linear, to help them engage and understand the build-up to what that event really means, what it took for the athletes to get there, what it took for the teams to accomplish that. And so that's where a lot of our emphasis is really trying to drive the story, build the story so that people are more engaged throughout it to understand it better.
Well, what was interesting is I felt that one was able to actually watch multiple events simultaneously, keep track of all of them, switch between them, actually easier than changing the channel between NBC Prime and Sports Network, which
100%,
And so when you have all of the information you want with standings, with scores, understanding what's trending and the rest of it all from the app, you're going to see a continued, I think you're going to see a continued absolute increase in the number of streams or number of individuals that are watching what appears to be simultaneous streams, and then the total amount of bandwidth that's required to do that.
Right, and the growth in connected devices is really staggering the way it is right now. Well, we really appreciate all of you coming out here and being a part of this. We know you have a lot of options on the early Sunday evening of NAB week, and you got a big week ahead of you.